You are listening to the Spent the Rent podcast. And now, here's your host, Patty Rose.
Hello, I am Patty Rose. Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. My guest today is Jim Couples. Let me make sure that I got this on the wrong. I do got it on the right setting. Okay, good. Jim Couples. Jim is a businessman and technologist. We've been friends for a couple years. You moved to Oregon from New York in 2006, served in the U.S. Marine Corps, studied at the University of Oregon, studied political science. And like I said, we've been friends for a couple years. I always like talking to you about politics and all kinds of good stuff. So I thought I would have you on. You've been really busy today in a bunch of meetings. So first of all, I want to say thank you for fitting this in really in the middle of your Friday.
Thank you for thanking me, Patty. I am stoked. We catch up every couple of weeks, and it's fun to do it on the podcast.
Yeah, man. So there's a big announcement before I get into anything. The DPLC, which is the Democratic Party of Lane County, the DPLC Chili Cook-Off is Sunday, August 25th at noon at Alton Baker Park. That's the DPLC Chili Cook-Off. This is a big event. It's a fundraiser for down ballot elections, local elections. It's really an important thing, and it's fun. All the different groups of people have, their submission of chili, and I went a couple times, and it's a lot of fun. So I recommend people go. Chili Cook-Off, Alton Baker Park, DPLC, Sunday, August 25th at noon. Okay, so there's so much news to talk about. I'm so glad that you agreed to do this, because a lot of times I have guests where we talk about projects that they're working on, and you've got a lot of stuff you're doing, but you're always down to just kind of chit chat with me about presidential politics. So we're going to do that a little bit. There's so much to cover that we're going to try to keep it a little bit chronological as much as possible. So we're going to go back to July 13th. I was at the Justin Herbert celebrity softball game that was put on by Kids Sports. It was an awesome event. My buddy Dan Trent is a sports director for Kids Sports, and they're just doing great stuff. And Justin Herbert was gracious enough to come back with a bunch of Chargers and a bunch of different people, and they had a celebrity softball game, and Dana and I went, and it was really super fun. And we're there, and while we're there, we get alerts on our phones, and you can see people kind of in the crowd start to react that Trump had been shot. Quickly reports were that he was okay, but that there was victims at the rally. I know that one person did unfortunately die. I want to just say I unequivocally do not support political violence of any kind. Obviously, with stuff like this, because we're so desensitized, there's going to be memes and different things, and anyone that's cheering this on has some serious maturing to do. So I definitely don't want to encourage that, and I don't want to peddle in conspiracy theories, though I do find it weird that it's already become old news, and that might have more to do with the news cycle that we live in. I also think that the bandages worn by the people at the RNC that were not Donald Trump was also very weird. What are your thoughts on us living in the 1960s?
It is like the 60s, and like the hottest part of the 60s. Every week is a month. So I'm like, oh my gosh, July 13th, when, that was a long time ago. It feels that way, even though it's just 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think there are some things that are analogous to the 60s, as far as how divided the country was, right? Back then, you really had like things tearing at the social fabric between, the Vietnam War was huge. Martin Luther King was our one of our civic leaders, and Martin Luther King, prior to him being assassinated, Martin Luther King was really touched on a lot of hot button issues. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, he was in Memphis at a sanitation strike, and he was doing a lot of things for actually a new political party that he was trying to start up. I think it was called I'm gonna mess up the name, but it was something like either the Poor People's Party, which is kind of negative, but
it's to the point, though. That's the thing.
It is to the point, and it's things are really just divisive and violent, unfortunately.
Right. I mean, the 60s, we lost JFK, we lost Martin Luther King, we lost Bobby Kennedy. I mean, there's so many more too. Shout out to Chris McAllister, who's watching at home. 2 of my favorite human beings doing what they do best. That's what he said. So Yeah, I mean, just with this, that's my first thought was, here we go, because I already felt like we were kind of, back to the 60s. Obviously, the, hyperbole in some people's minds, when it comes to 2025, of what the 1950s is what it would look like. But I mean, to a lot of people, I think that's very real, and I think it's easy for people to say, oh, that's over the top. But when you're a female and you're worried about some of these new policies that are being encouraged by Trump, it's tough. Now, that being said, that's the whole point. We can disagree on policies, but we cannot be talking about hurting people, and obviously I think that the reason that it goes away so fast is because the only conversation that you can have is about gun control. And that's not a popular thing for conservatives, obviously. And in an election cycle, especially with a new candidate, we're going to talk about that in a minute. I don't know if I want to talk about gun control at all either, because it's unpopular for the one that I support. So
I haven't heard much. Gun control, we just have so many other things that have come to the forefront. I'm not saying gun control is no longer an issue, but it's been deprioritized as far as like national conversation.
And I've heard Kamala Harris and her VP pick, we're going to talk about Tim Walz, talk about that a little bit, just kind of because it's definitely progressive talking points. But it's interesting because after the assassination attempt, I was thinking, well, I mean, there's not really much that can be said, other than we all need to do better. We all need to stop encouraging, the demonization of the other side to the point to where they're monsters. I don't care who it is, really. I mean, it's unfortunate that they choose to, elect monsters to lead their party, but that's a different thing. And I try to target the politicians and not the people, because the people are just stuck in this. We're just voters. We're just, convinced of a different strategy. But so that was July 13th was the assassination attempt, and it was pretty numbing to see this happen. And I was glad that Trump made it through, because I honestly don't think that would be good for anything. July 21st. Biden steps down. Democrats found themselves after the debate hopeless, watching a failing Biden campaign with a leader who could not prosecute one of the most toxic candidates in history in Trump. I mean, that's the thing that I think was so disheartening. It's no secret that I'm obviously not a Trump fan. And when somebody is running against him, they need to be able to articulate the atrocities of what he's doing. What are your thoughts on this whole demise of Biden?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I should have been bolder in my thoughts, but I kind of did not think that Biden would make it to Election Day as well. I was expecting him to drop out earlier. This was nothing against Joe Biden. I just think that he had cognitive issues or has cognitive issues. And that's what happens when you get older very often. Sometimes it doesn't. There's people who get into their 90s and they're still sharp as tacks. But for most of us, we are going to go through that process. I felt that I saw that with Joe Biden when he was talking. And if you doubt that, I would encourage you to go back to like the 2008 VP debates. Where it was Vice President Biden and Sarah Palin, or you could go to 2012 and the Vice President debates. And Joe Biden was incredibly quick then, and you just felt like some things were lost. So I thought that was kind of coming. I didn't expect it to happen the way that it did. I'm glad, actually that the Democrats kind of respected the process, and that Vice President Kamala Harris is now the presidential nominee. There's two ways you can go, right? You can like try to squeeze in some type of primary or let the convention take its place. But I thought that, a vice president is supposed to step up when the president is either not there or incapacitated, whatever it is. So to me, there's going to be criticism either way, and the way that it went, I'm more satisfied with. That speaks to nothing whether who I'd like to run for president. It would be Chris McAllister, but save him. No, I actually really like that the way they did it. There's still criticism to be had, because you can always do that, but this way they really respected who was the vice president and how that procedure is supposed to.
I mean, my concern with Biden goes back to 2020, where they consolidated power to make sure that Bernie Sanders wasn't the candidate. And, Kamala Harris wasn't popular then, but I've been saying it for a while. The last couple of weeks, I was seeing a different tone in her. And I don't know how to explain it. There's something, I think that she was put in a really bad position as vice president. I think that if you actually look at the way that stuff is done, she's, vice presidents are often given the hardest jobs so that they can kind of be taking the blame on them and all that kind of stuff, because it's a position. There's a really good episode of Frontline that just aired. It's called Biden's Decision. And it really goes into this about how Biden had a lot of times where he was on the outside of the White House in the Obama administration, so where he gets clowned on, and he was already the old guy. And you're talking about, you can go back and watch times, you can watch him in 2012 and different times. You can also go back and watch him in like 1986 when he ran for president. That's the whole thing of why I don't know why this is a surprise. I made a joke a while back and I got shit for it from, some prominent people in our community, that I made a joke online on Facebook about how, when do you stop saying that this person would be this old today? Like I had said, my mom would be this old. My mom would be 64 years old, if she was still alive. So at what age do you have to stop saying that? Because age is just one of those things, right? So I was just having a kind of a asshole boyish wonder, and I was thinking about it. So I Googled whose celebrity birthday, and it was Dwight Eisenhower would have been 132 that day. So I was like, Dwight Eisenhower would be 132 years old today, but he's not, because he died in 1969 when Joe Biden was 29. And it's just one of those things that I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be ageist, but there is a certain point where this shouldn't come as a shock, at a certain age. I mean, now Trump is the old one, and the narrative seems like it may be actually switching a little bit, because at least in the eyes of Democrats, I mean, anything's going to, mount for them to be against him. But I'm going to talk about that now. In unprecedented fashion, Biden steps down. And I, for one, like you had said, I've been vocal that Kamala was the only choice to replace him without disenfranchising voters in the primary in that election cycle, because in an incumbent situation, especially, they knew full well that they were voting for Kamala Harris as well as a candidate, as the vice president for Joe Biden. So though she's her own person, her presidency will be very different. It comes as a natural progression, being that she's his VP. What are your thoughts on her? What are your thoughts? You said that you kind of like the transition. I think that there wasn't much of a choice. How do you say Kamala? Did I say that correct? I did say that correct. I want to slow down, everybody. Kamala, not Kamala. Kamala is wrong. Kamala, bad. Kamala, good. Okay. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, so far she's definitely, and this is just the data tells you, she's energized the party and the Democratic electorate. I don't know whether this is still the honeymoon period and things kind of go back to the mean. That'll be really interesting to see what happens. But, up to this point, in the couple of weeks, which feels like, months, that she's been the candidate, she certainly has re-energized things, and you see that in the rallies, right? Like you go to these rallies and they show you the people waiting in line. They'll wait in line for hours, 2-3 hours to get in and see her. So I think that says something. And then, of course, on the fundraising side, and I'm not a big fan of, pointing at, whoever's winning in fundraising should, win.
Sure.
But, there's people
it is telling. I'm not a fan of the system, and I'm sure I think there's better ways that we can allocate that money, but still, I know what you mean, though, that it's kind of like the stock market, where it's like there's metrics that you kind of have to go by. And a lot of times when there's more spending, there's more victories when it comes to national politics, especially, and I get that. And that's it. But no, I mean, the rallies are looking like Obama rallies. I mean, this is the first time there's been excitement, and it does need to be pointed out that these are the first Democratic rallies that are post-COVID, and so, I mean, realistically, I don't know if we're not post-COVID, it still is something we live with, but, Biden, there was no rallies for a lot of reasons. For one reason, because it was Joe Biden, because whatever happened in South Carolina in 2020, but I mean, I'm still bitter about that, but I mean, apparently Kamala Harris wanted to throw a bone to the progressives by her VP pick, Tim Walz. I was pretty unfamiliar with Tim Walz. He it was a football coach, which is rad. Took a winless team to the state championship. It's not always rad, because Tommy Tuberville in Alabama, I believe, is not rad. Anyway, so Tim Walz. He's the governor of Minnesota. He served in the military, though. I want to talk to you a little bit if you read up on it at all. And if you haven't, then we can skip it. But because I know he's getting a lot of flack for this already, because JD Vance, which is Donald Trump's VP pick, who is an interesting fella. Weird, by the way, is what Tim Walz calls him. He was so dramatic in saying that Tim Walz has stolen valor for the way that he describes his military service. And I am a mere civilian, so I'm a petty, just wee little person. You can explain this to me. Do you know the situation?
I am aware of it. I don't think, to me, it's unfortunate that that's what they're going after. And I've also seen people jump on JD Vance about his service. Right. Obviously,
I just think it's ugly when people do that.
Tim Walz do it, but I've seen other people point it out. I don't know. To me, it's really petty. There's policy things that are so different between Tim Walz and JD Vance and the parties at the presidential level that it's unfortunate that this is what they go after. I don't think that Tim Walz has committed stolen valor.
But that's what I mean, like the crocodile tears, like he's committing stolen valor, and I get it that it's a campaign, and but that's the thing is we've gotten to this, and I mean I want to look in the mirror and try not to do this myself, but that's the thing when that's what people's arguments are. Like you just said, you make a good point because it's about policy. If you're talking about policy, it's pretty easy to do, to show the distinction between the two.
It very much is. They've got very different careers, post-military service. They've just really lived in different worlds, right? JD Vance went to, I think, Ohio State for undergrad. Then he went to Yale for his law school. And then he goes to Silicon Valley. He's a successful VC and kind of in that world. And Tim Walz is just super different, right? He's a guy who spent the majority of his career as a high school coach. I'm sorry, high school teacher.
High school teacher and coach, yeah. And I mean, there's some cool stuff. There's some cool stuff that makes, a lot of different groups happy. I mean, in a way that he was the football coach and that there was a couple LGBT kids that came to him that said that they wanted to start a student union group or whatever. And he totally supported it. I can't remember all the details on that, but point is that he's a person that looks at his community where they're at or who they are and thinks about how they can deal with the issues that they face, and that's what's important is that our leaders know us and that they, deal with the issues that we face. And so I'm excited from the speech, at least that they gave. It was the first time, like, we had alluded to that it was the first time there was any excitement in a long time. So there's some optimism there for sure.
That's there, right? Like, and that's to match Trump. Trump gets people up. People wait in lines to go to his rallies. They love it. They love it. So I think there's more of an energy match now between the main presidential candidates. But on the vice presidential side, talking about stolen valor, things like that.
Yeah, I think
really far away from policy, and it's also very illustrative of how we throw out these things that are just like really exciting and have nothing to do really with it, and they might be baseless.
Well, like Chris Kyle, I mean, he's somebody that a lot of circles want to say is just an absolute hero. And I think it's a bad thing either way to look at. I think that we should look at people that serve our country, that we honor what they did. And I think that sometimes there's situations where it doesn't end exactly the same. I don't know exactly. There's nothing with Tim Walz that I think is problematic or JD Vance. I think that that's my point is that if you served, thank you for serving the country. And that's the way that I look at it. And there's reasons that people exit in different fashion. And whatever, that's not my place. I don't know. I just appreciate, I mean, and I understand that for people that have served, it's different. And I don't want to disrespect that. I really don't.
I don't think we're too different on that point. I mean, but I'm kind of like, this should be way more open shut. Good on both of you. Move on. And then, like I said, it's not like we don't have anything to differentiate them by.
Totally I mean, the attacks I've seen, that 29 years ago that Tim Walz had a DWI, driving under the influence of intoxicants of alcohol, and then it sounds like quit drinking. So that's something that I can relate to, and that's what the reports that I've read, and so they try to attack him on that, and so that's a question of his character, and I think that's shows once again that he's a human being just like all of us. I mean, Dick Cheney, George Bush both had DUIs. Donald Trump doesn't drive himself, so that is not a possibility for him to get a DUI. I don't know. Tim Walz's students telling him to run for Congress are the ones that I don't know. I encourage anybody to go watch that first rally because it was pretty exciting. So now I wanted to segue into this, and we talked before when I've had you on the show about a website that you put together, and it's called runforoffice.org. And tell me about this again, because I think that Tim Walz is a perfect example of this, of why a website like this could be a resource that could like start from not rags to riches, but like how, and this is just an American story, so tell me about runforoffice.org.
Sure. Well, years ago, this is like maybe 2014, I looked at our local elections and I saw there were a whole bunch of uncontested races, just one candidate, and then a few where there were zero candidates. And in those cases, very often someone is appointed the position. So, living where we live, Patty, and understanding, how fired up people get over politics, I had the question, why don't people run for office? And I said, well, it's hard to figure out, what you can run for, what the filing deadline is, and everything else. So I worked on that project for years, did some of it with academia and then with a private software company. But I just want to add that I was wrong in the big thing that I thought was people don't run because they don't know what they can run for, and this is going to fix a lot. That's only 1/2 or 1/3 of really getting a better democracy and more representation. You not only have to know what you have to run for, you have to have people that can run campaigns that are going to be able to help you. Especially if you're a working person and you've only got a couple hours in the day aside from taking care of your family. If you've got kids, there's that. It's a lot of work. So I've rethought a lot of this, and Run for Office is awesome. Right, I did that project, and I then worked for a company called Nation Builder. Had a great time there, doing political software and that tool. But I'm also really interested now in how people that know how to run campaigns advance. I think that's what you really have to work on next, is making sure that candidates have a support network, because dang, is you get into a competitive race and someone either outraises you and they can hire better campaign staff. Or sometimes, I've seen this happen all over, just about everybody except for the minor parties, people will get blackballed within a party. If you're running in the Republicans against a really popular Republican, people aren't going to want to touch you. And that same thing goes on the Democratic side. So that stuff, we should address that.
We've seen that locally. I mean, we've seen where a candidate that wants to step up to energize a primary process that we're supposed to have. Yeah. I mean, I think that unfortunately, I try to call balls and strikes fairly. And when Republicans say to me, and I have Republican friends, quite a few actually. And when Republicans say to me, like, so you're telling me that the Republicans are the ones that are threatening democracy? I mean, after a while, it's like, when was the last time I think I actually saw a fair primary process? I honestly can't tell you. Maybe Obama was the last time that, and they tried to push Hillary that time. And so this time, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to say that Kamala Harris was put in this position. I mean, whether it's warranted or not, that's not going to be me to decide. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, she didn't even get elected. But that's why, I mean, she's gonna have to get elected this time. We're gonna have to vote for her in the general, so that'll be a moot point at that point. Because I think
I would also push back and say, well, she did get elected, right? In 2020, she was on the ticket. It'd be one thing if the middle of Biden's term, he replaces vice president. But you knew what you were getting when you voted for President Biden in the primaries. And just as to your point, right, the Democratic primaries were not the most competitive primaries in 2024. There's a whole bunch of issues with that. But all I think a lot of this comes back to having, so I worked on Run for Office. That was to help people understand what they could run for and those requirements, the filing windows. That's helpful. But the whole thing is making sure that candidates have the support they need to run competitively. And then that's where you get a real vibrant democracy and choices for the voters.
Well, we also need to make sure that people know how to get things done once they get elected, too. I mean, it's important that you understand how to pass legislation. But I mean, I think nowadays AI can do a lot of the early stages of running for office. We're talking about, reason I wanted to segue into that is because Tim Walz is somebody that just stepped up and ran for Congress. And when I started this podcast, I knew very little about why congressional terms were only 2 years long.
Well, he was in the Minnesota House, right? He was in the. Oh no, he was in.
He was in the Congress.
You're
he
right.
Ran for Congress.
Yeah, he ran Congress,
and he ran straight for his kids. Told him to run for Congress. And what I was going to say though is that I kind of understand why it's 2-year terms. Though I mean the conversation term limits should be different and all that stuff. But still, Congress is 2-year terms because it's really the people's house where there's going to be people that are just normal, average people that get elected to Congress. I mean, it's not just people. I mean, there's reports that he's never owned a stock or that he owns 0 stocks, and that's pretty rare for somebody to be at that level. I mean, Donald Trump has a stock with his name on it, which is how that's not a conflict of interest. Literally DJT is you can buy stock, which can give you favor with the White House. That's I mean, how's that? Is that
for Truth Social?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
That's what that's listed under. Oh,
yeah, DJT. I follow it because it goes. It's like it's the same. It's worth about the same amount as Dutch Bros. Ironically,
oh no.
Yeah, it's like $30-$40. It's in that range a share because it's worthless. It's worthless. It's worth that much because people funnel money into it. As it's like, Google that, guys. Google Donald Trump stock. It's wild.
I can't speak to intelligence of that, but to the point of Tim Walz being refreshing because he doesn't have, kind of like he's got more, I don't know, I guess you call it a working class background than you often see.
Yeah, that's and he's got a pretty cool approach. I mean, I think it also squashes some of the myths that there's just in the Midwest that everybody's just, religious fundamentalist, because there's a lot of different ways that people can interpret Christianity too, or just being a good person, period. I mean, it's, I know that it's an important, go ahead.
Well, one more thing I think about when you mentioned the Midwest. So of course it's Minnesota, so it's the upper Midwest, and I found it interesting that Minnesota is the farthest thing from a swing state, right? Like Minnesota is going to be solidly blue. Yeah. So the choice of Tim Walz wasn't, just to kind of nail down a swing state. For that, they would have chosen Senator Mark Kelly from like Arizona or one of those other states. They were looking at Shapiro from Pennsylvania. So they believe that Tim Walz has a wider appeal.
Yeah, you don't want him to overshadow. It's do no harm is the Veep stakes, but you don't want to overshadow the president. Is the thing, especially with Kamala Harris in this setting. You don't want to overshadow her. I mean, they didn't want her to overshadow Biden, and that's why they didn't allow her to do anything good. so that's why she always ended up looking bad. Is because they didn't want to.
Vice president's always tough, though. There's been exceptions, right? Like nobody laughed at Dick Cheney. You all knew that he was a major part of the White House. For President Obama, I mean, he was known to write his own speeches, which is kind of unheard of. So he had his controls over all the White House. But there's Dan Quayle was often made fun of. Like vice president's a tough gig to be taken serious.
Even Biden. I mean, the memes were that he was leaving stuff in the microwave at the White House. When they left, when they had the because that was the last time there was an actual transfer of power, a peaceful one. It's going to be interesting to see. But I encourage anybody. Tim Walz is kind of relatively unknown, and that's why I think I encourage anybody to look into Tim Walz and watch some of the speeches. Also, run for office yourself, people. Step up. Hey, why not? School board. You could be on. You could be whatever. You could run for sheriff.
You could run for utility board positions. You can run for Parks and Rec positions. I mean, Oregon specifically. I did this project and we had it national. Oregon has more local control than or is equivalent to with just about any other state. The other comparable one is Washington. Where in Washington they'll have cemetery districts, soil and water districts, just like we have here in Oregon, where people are elected. So they, you should take advantage of that. It's not only would it benefit the democracy, but you also might be helping other people start to understand how to run campaigns, and that is just an essential part of all this.
It's cool, and there's a lot of energy to them too. I mean, I saw it, I felt it with Obama, and this Kamala Harris campaign is an interesting thing because I think that it's going to end up not being about Kamala Harris. I think it's about more than that. I think it's about looking forward, whereas Donald Trump's about looking back. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, now, granted, I get a lot of flack for doing this podcast from some of my friends that are like, why don't you talk about other sides? Why don't you talk about other sides? I'm going to do what I think. I mean, this is what I support. You know what I mean? So, but one more thing. You want to talk about all the farms? I was going to have you mention it because, the segue, Tim Walls grew up on a farm in Nebraska. Is that another website is that still in the works? I thought that was such a cool concept.
Oh, yeah. All the farms is somewhat similar to Run for Office, where Run for Office was enter your address, see what you could run for. And all the farms is the same. Put in your address and you'll see local farms, what they're carrying, where you can buy their products. It's free for farms to use and for people to use. You don't have to enter any of your own information. I do that project with a friend of mine. Shout out to Chris Stiles of Corvallis. Chris is an amazing full stack developer, and he and I had actually met in the Bernie campaign back in 2015 or so. And then he and I, he had an interest in local politics, so he was into Run for Office. And then Chris grew up on an orchard and then moved out here in North Carolina. I lived in Orchard, then moves out here. So he had the same interest. It was local food systems. And it's like, why don't I shop more or buy things from my local farms? So we built that site. Now that site still functions. We still add farms. We get people adding their own farms, which is awesome. We don't make any money on that. Chris and I both have other jobs that we do. And that is just to try to encourage a local food system knowledge.
I just like talking about it because you do these little websites that are obscure, but they serve such a cool purpose. And so, runforoffice.org, allthefarms.com, these are cool websites that you put together to help people kind of make better decisions and make better choices in their community. I think it's rad. So, Jim Couples, thank you so much. Do you want to talk real quick before we get out of here? We got a few more minutes. You want to talk about duck football? I mean, we're changing to the Big Ten, so this is a huge deal. This will be the last time I'll probably have an episode. This is episode number 221 for my podcast. This starts the beginning of the 7th season, which is wild. And this will probably be the last time the Ducks are actually, it's official already. The Ducks are officially part of the Big Ten. I mean, what do you think about the change? I'm not sure. I'm stoked, but I'm kind of excited about something different. I'm going to a conference game this season against Maryland. That's the only game I could afford because I'm a barber. But because the Ohio State game is the most expensive game in the country.
Yeah.
So at Austin State,
is that right? In the entire country or on the Ducks schedule?
No, it's the most expensive ticket in the country. It's the biggest game of the year.
I've thought a lot about that. I do a lot of work up in northeastern Washington for my day job. So there's a lot of people from Washington State University there, and now they feel very, very betrayed, just like Oregon State did, that everybody kind of abandoned the pack. But to me, it's a whole new world that we're in now. It's Big 18 football. I think that's the number of the people in the districts. I don't know if that's a sign of things to come. I certainly would love for us to get back to something more regional. Just less mileage. It'll feel like a little bit less like the NFL if we're hanging around and playing, teams that are kind of more local.
Totally. It's interesting because I've been playing the college football video game because it just dropped, and it gives you an option to change conferences, which is cool because the Pac-12 is kind of in limbo, so it still exists, but you can basically decide what you want to do with it,
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
which awesome.
Is awesome because when the game was made, Oregon State and Washington State were still in it officially. And I think that their jerseys will say Pac-12 this season, but I think that they're part of the Mountain West moving forward. So this year it's officially that they're just 2 teams in the Pac-12. There'll be no championship game, but so it's kind of, they're literally in limbo, but on the game, you can kind of rebuild it. So it's kind of a neat little way to play with it. Cause I always make my own school, the Springfield Crackerbacks. And And so I kind of rebuilt the Pac-12 because I'm not going to do the Big Ten, but the one thing that I'd like to do, because of the little OCD in me, is that I want to make sure that if it's called Big 12, that there's 12 teams. And then if it's called Big 10, that Big 10's a little harder because the Big 12 is a very new conference. I mean, the SEC is just insane. If you look at it, it's literally like the NFL.
Yeah.
The SEC. And like you said, but the Big 10 is going to give it a run for its money. And there's going to be some seasons where the ACC can look pretty good, at certain times on television for a couple weekends. I don't know about overall if they could all. It's going to be interesting if you look at like these mega conferences, their win-loss records against each other. But I don't know. I don't like it. I wish we had regional winners and automatic bids to a 12-team playoff. We got the playoff, so why do we need all this to be in the same conference now? We just play these regional games, and then the winner of each conference gets to the playoff, and then you break it down, you beat each other till you have a winner. I don't know.
More tournament for the end of the season is better. I would say expand it. I would say 8's a good number, but there might be like playoff or almost like bowl games beforehand to get into that 8 that goes forward. I do want to say, so you're going to the Ducks Terrapins game with Maryland. Right. The only football game I have tickets for this year is Washington State University playing Wyoming at the very end of the year, a day or two after Thanksgiving. And I am so stoked for that. That's going to be up in Pullman.
It's at a tar pit somewhere, just like.
No, that's up in Pullman. It's going to be awesome. I was like, oh, this is a cool game to get to. You know how much those tickets were? And the tickets are awesome. They're like,
they're probably $20 or less.
They were around $50 each for 2 tickets. I got them as part of a Costco deal in Pasco, Washington, when I was driving through there. And I couldn't believe I could pick the tickets, and they were in the middle of the field, and I don't know, they're like 10, 12 rows up. I was
get to coach the second half. They're like, you can coach the third quarter. It's no problem. One last thing is the Ducks have new uniforms once again. And their slogan this year is "Damn Green" because because of the comment that Dan Lanning made when he said the grass is damn green in Eugene. But how sad is it for the Beavers that everything is like, their whole thing is the dam, like the Beaver Dam. It's like they don't know. I mean, now they don't have a good conference, and our stuff says damn green. I don't know. It's just, I feel bad for the Beavers, and they have chainsaws, so you have to be careful around them.
They love the chainsaws. I will say it's really fun to go up to an OSU game, and if you're
I wouldn't say really fun, but like
it is. No, I will. No. You go to the Flying Squirrel beforehand.
I've never been actually to a Beavers game. I bet you they're awesome. I remember last year that one game that was just so exciting that everybody just seemed to turn on like at the very last second when they had like a 90-yard touchdown pass. It was awesome. But I don't know. It's already football season and it's wild. I read that the preseason starts for the NFL like this weekend. So I mean the Hall of Fame game I think is this weekend. So it's pretty wild. But I'm gonna let you get out of here though, because you said you got to get back to, you got meetings all day. But what, you got one more thing?
Yeah, I do. I want to give a plug for a movie that I think you would enjoy that comes out today locally. It's called Didi. It's about a young Asian American kid around, I think, 12 or 13. And he's going through that period. He's into skating. He's into like filming videos, posting them on YouTube. My wife and I are super stoked to see it. We might even bring my son. It's and it's playing downtown at the Eugene Metro. So we'll give them a free plug and go check that out.
Awesome. That's cool that there's still theaters like that exist, So Jim Couples, thank you so much. You're a good friend. I always love chatting with you.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks for everyone watching. And let's have a calm, sane summer, but still have some fun.
That's right. Let's talk about our differences with our political views, but let's try to remember that we all have to live together and everybody love everybody. So I'm going to get out of here. If you'd like to donate to the show, go to strpod.com, strpod.com. Thank you so much.
Cheers.